So welcome to another episode of the POFcast. I'm Rob Lancaster.
I'm Minagano Kape.
And I'm David Vincent.
We've just arrived back from Pibor for the 6th Intercommunal Governance Structure meeting, the ICGS. And so today's POFcast is going to be looking at a little bit the context behind the ICGS and the history dating back to the Pieri conference, and then the dynamics as they've evolved and some of the opportunities and challenges coming out of this most recent iteration of the ICGS. So firstly, maybe we can give people a bit of background to the Pieri process overall and how this has evolved into the ICGS. So maybe, David, you can kick us off.
Yeah, so, no, thank you, Rob. I remember as Peace Building Opportunities Fund, I think our entry point after we had consulted all the community, the three communities, the Nuer, Dinka and Murle, then we conducted a peace caravan where we took all the youth around just to affirm their commitment to peace processes. And at the end of that, it became quite clear that there has to be some sort of a framework that would guide the three communities working together, especially around peace, if they want to work towards peace together. And to collectively do that, the Pieri Peace dialogue was initiated where they said, okay, let's all meet at one place and have a conversation and see how we will go about it. So Pieri, which is a Payam and Uror county, was picked as a venue. And just because the spiritual leader, Dakweth, was based in Pieri at the time, and he was appointed or agreed upon as the steward of the dialogue. So when the three communities were consulted, they all agreed that this is where we need to meet up. So the 10-day dialogue was quite incredible, where we brought all the women, the youth, the chiefs, and some of the local authorities together to have a conversation and agree on what needed to be done to set the framework for peace process for the Greater Jonglei and GPAA.
And that was now 4 years ago, May or so 2021. What stands out still in your memory from the Pieri conference?
I think what stood out for me was the ritual. Because one thing in terms of approach which was different from many other dialogues that have been done across or in that region, is that before the three communities sat, the spiritual leader Dakweth said each community would present a bull and they have to conduct a ritual that will affirm or confirm their commitment to the process. And then at the end also there have to be further killing of the bulls at the end to say, look, we have agreed. So in a very conventional way, people sign peace agreements, but this one for them is cemented by the blood of the bulls that were split in the process. For me, that stood out quite clearly.
And maybe just to add on that, we had that scenario in the first few days where what seemed like a fairly innocuous start to the process of throwing water on a bull, it went round and Dakweth, spiritual leader, threw the water, and then the Nuer threw the water, and then the Murle threw the water, but the Dinka were not prepared to throw the water. Yeah. So I think it was...
What did they do?
Well, it descended into a sort of mild chaos over 2 days, where we ended up having to run between the Dinka and the other two groups, and then also with Dakweth and so forth. Got to a point of Dakweth suggesting that we just leave that group behind in the process potentially, and then at another point where the Dinka said, oh well, let's just go home, but we didn't have flights available to take people home. So that was one of the things that we'd scheduled 10 days for the process, so there was no, for any of us, there was no escaping.
You're stuck with each other.
Exactly. Driving through this process, but once we got through it, it kind of unlocked a bit of momentum through to the end of that. So you've joined this after the Pieri process. What's Pieri from your perspective, having come into the process more recently?
No, it's quite interesting because the Pieri agreement has been cited over and over, even if it's 4 years or going to 5 years or 4 years.
Yeah,
4 years now. 4 years now, but in most of the engagement with the communities, they will cite their commitment to Pieri. So to me, this tells that this is an agreement that they are really all invested in, and they believe in it, despite the fact that things have not happened exactly as it has been agreed in the Pieri Agreement. They're still committed to what they have agreed as a community. So I find that quite interesting. Even in the message of Duckworth during the ICGS in Pibor, he kept on citing their commitment to the Pieri Agreement, which is just really good.
Yeah, so the Pieri Agreement, which people can look at in more detail online, has a number of different aspects to it. One of the most significant related to abductees, and we'll come back to that later in the conversation. But there were three separate, initially, provisions of the Pieri Agreement that spoke to several structures, one for the chiefs, one for the women, and one for the youth, that they wanted to set up as a mechanism for kind of guiding the intercommunal governance from that point forward. Which was then translated into this concept of the Intercommunal Governance Structures, which we then appended the commissioners to. Appended, that's probably not doing them justice, but because of their significance in the process, and had those first two meetings in Bor and Pibor in 2021, and then it all sort of unfolded, and we picked it up again in 2023. So what is the ICGS? Like structures, youth, women, chief, commissioners, okay, fine. That in one sense is a little bit sterile, but what's the idea behind this?
From what I recalled, as during Pieri Peace Dialogue, I think what the communities were trying to get to is to have, they were thinking through the lens of justice and accountability. And it has, since then it has evolved, but I think the original idea was we need to bring the youth, the chiefs and the women and the local authorities together, where if any community that has violated the process or the agreement, this is the platform where they could have a conversation around and perhaps come up with ways or consequences or what needed to be done in terms of justice and all that around that. And it also came, there was also a discussion around having the mobile courts going around in different places between the three communities. So for me, that's how it evolved. But very quickly, it became a platform where the three communities and different structures can express their concerns, can express what went well, what didn't go well, and what possibly would be the solution moving forward. And I think for me, what was key is the bond and very quickly, the relationship that were built by the members themselves was quite interesting in a way. And that's why often in all the ICGS meeting, there's always a concern that why didn't I see so-and-so is not part of it this time? And so it became a little group that were, sort of worked quite well together. But of course it has its own challenges, but I think that was the original idea behind it.
So we've just come back from the 6th ICGS meeting, and it's been rotating around, but this is the second time, in fact, that it's been in Pibor. And so, Minigan, can you tell us a little bit about the context for this meeting particularly? What's been going on, and from that, what are some of the key focus areas that we had for the agenda this time?
Okay, so the 6th ICGS meeting in Pibor happened just few days after the rumors of mobilization in December 2024. There was a rumors of mobilization by the Dinka and the Nuer community. And to some extent, there was a small attack that happened in Gumruk, one of the counties in Pibor administrative area. But still, given the challenges before the 6th ICGS meeting, the communities still were able to navigate their ways to come together and have a conversation. And to me, I think that also gave a lot of emphasis of why they think this gathering of the communities is very important as a platform for them to share their grievances, for them to call each other out on things that are not happening well, and for them to hold each other accountable. But this 6th ICGS meeting is also happening at the time when partners are also facing challenges in terms of resourcing this ICGS gathering. Usually this gathering is very, it's cost, it takes a lot of resources because the members of the ICGS have to be flown to some of these destinations. And given the infrastructure challenges in South Sudan, like all these areas, the members of the ICGS need to be flown into the location. So I think it's a great opportunity for the communities to evaluate some of the resolutions of the ICGS that happened in Akobo, and also the meeting that they had in Juba last year in September, when we could not have the ICGS in July because of weather challenges. So that was an opportunity for them to do an evaluation of that, but also to talk deeply on issues of mobilization, because we know it has been happening over and over, especially around the dry season. We find ourselves as partners, as communities, having to deal with the question of mobilization and potential attack. So, and issues to do with return of abductees was also a very important topic that was discussed during the ICGS meeting in Pibor. Yeah.
So we'll come back to abductees specifically and some of the history around that, and also to some of the positive opportunities coming out of this last meeting. But can we talk little bit about the challenges of this process, and both in the meeting itself, but also more generally in the process? What makes this such a complicated or complex engagement?
I think the first thing the immediate challenge is the members. The members are scattered all across the greater Jonglei GPA, and in particular the Murle members. Some members are really at the very far end where it's very difficult to reach them. Even just to ask them to come to the meeting, there's no network, telecommunication network reach in some of those areas. So literally a word has to be sent. Someone has to walk across and say, look, you are needed certain day. That's part of it. But so that's sort of one sort of logistics of moving of the members. Then the other part of it is that prior to the actual meeting itself, it's required that the members themselves conduct several meetings in preparation to the main meeting. They need to sit alone and consult the communities, the local authorities, and have a conversation around what had happened, what do we need to present at this meeting. So that alone presents itself a challenge, because they are not in one place for a pre-engagement to take place in a sense. And on top of that, especially when the sporadic attacks keep happening, so it makes it very difficult for the members to convince their communities that we are going to attend this meeting. A lot of people sort of get demoralized and say, why would you go to this meeting, and yet the attacks keep going? So it's in itself is just quite apart from logistics, just to sort of pull the agenda together is not quite easy to sort of make it work in a sense.
And then the dynamics of the retaliation, or depending on how you characterize it. So just as we were leaving, there was this attack in a different part. So the allegations are there as to who it might or might not have been. But how does that influence the process? These attacks that happen from time to time, some more frequently on certain sides, less frequently on others, some bigger scale, some smaller scale.
So this particular time, one of the attacks happened in an area in Walgak, an area where one of a very strong and committed youth leader comes from Thorbolis, in a sense. And so you could see the attack happened, the news came in, so the day two, he was really very gloomy and very sad, in a sense. So those attacks that happen while the dialogue is on or the meeting is on are really quite hard, because it sets the tone and the mood of the meeting itself. And that prevails when he was asked to speak. He literally got up and outlined the challenges that they have been facing. And as a youth leader, when these attacks happen, the community, of course, challenge him. You are the defender of the community. Why aren't you reacting? And what they mean is, why are you not retaliating by mobilizing as well to go and attack? And so it puts him in a very difficult position. And this particular time, he got up and almost issued an ultimatum to say, look, I'm giving you from now up until sort of end of February or so, whatever he said, if you don't stop these attacks and there's no changes, then I'm not going to attend any other meeting that's come. So that frustration comes out during that meeting, in a sense. But it's also a bigger challenge for the Murle community as well. How can they respond to these allegations, or how can they give a concrete answer that gives hope to the other two communities that shows that we are doing something? So it's quite difficult for us, especially as facilitators, that are holding a space for this community, we find it very difficult. How do we juggle these all aspects?
And you get these narratives that are generalized on all sides, right? So people will point to the incidents of violence that have happened and then generalize that across the entire community. And so what's less visible is when there's actually a pocket where things are improving and the relationships are maybe showing signs of moving forward positively, and even economic exchange starting to happen. But one incident happens and immediately it gets generalized across, and potentially then retaliating in one place for an incident that happened in another place, which then in that first place is seen as an act of aggression, not of retaliation. So all the complexities of those dynamics too.
Almost feels like, at least in the 2 ICGs that I have attended, the first 2 days is always quite hostile. People are angry, and also as facilitators, we may have an agenda, we may have design a process of how we want the meeting to look like, but in most cases we have to navigate ways of changing how the conversation should look like in the middle of the meeting, given the different dynamics that is happening, which can be quite difficult, but also interesting at the same time.
So can we pick up there on the abductees question specifically? And perhaps you can, Minigano, flesh out a little bit where that's at and some of the dynamics around the abductee question as well, and what makes that challenging in this. Challenging, but also an opportunity for the positive side.
Yeah, so what I found interesting is in this particular meeting, we went in with the hard question, right, to ask the communities how many, give us a target of abductees that you're willing to return. And I sense, I've been in the different groups, but I mainly sat in the Murle group. I sense that was a very difficult question, especially for the Murle to answer. And I think the different communities came up with their numbers. And then the Murle realized the number they came with is quite very vague. They're not willing, in the discussion, they're not willing to say a number. They were just saying from 2 onwards. But I think towards the end, the other communities were able to express their dissatisfaction with the number that was given by the Murle, and then they were able to sit again together and say and agree on an equal number that each community should bring. I think despite the difficulty of this topic, there is some level of commitment by the local authorities, by the youth representatives of the ICGS to make an effort to collect the abducted children. But of course, there are challenges around that. Given the sporadic attacks that you talk about, some of them are making an effort to collect the children, but then more children are being abducted in the different attacks that is happening. But I think from this particular ICGS, at least they have all committed, they have expressed their commitment, and there's a number attached to it that each community have committed to bring by a specific period of time. And this is what they said they're working towards. Of course, there are so many challenges on the way. We don't know if it's going to happen, but I feel like it's now like a challenge. Each community will want to show the other community that they're making in an effort.
I just wanted to come in very quickly. What helped the Pieri Peace Agreement to sort of push it far is the return of the abductees, the women and children in a way. At the back of, as soon as the Pieri Agreement was signed, very quickly there were a few women and children that were returned, and that created a massive excitement. And I think it's in its hundreds now, the women and children that have been reunified with their biological parents or relatives. That is quite incredible. And over the years, what we've been doing as well is that in every ICGS meeting, the return of abductees is the key agenda that is discussed. And then often there is a blanket statement, we are committed to return the children and women. But this, the 6th ICGS, we thought perhaps we push it a little bit further by saying we need your commitment and drilling it down to some specifics and say, okay, so if you are committed, then how many can each county return? And we have 11 counties that are involved in this process. And so for them to agree to 6 per county, I think it's a great. And as Minagano mentioned, it wasn't easy for them to arrive at 6. It took a lot of discussions and all that. But I think because it's children and women is a key part of this process. They have agreed, and now they have set themselves a target. By the next ICGS, each county would have returned 6. For me, that was quite incredible for them to. So we see now how will this be implemented.
What was also interesting to me in the discussion about the abductees is the role of women in identification of the abducted children and women, but also their role in promoting the culture of abducting children and also buying abducted children, especially in the Murle community. I remember one chief said, when we were talking about accountability, he said, when we're talking about accountability for abduction or people who are abducted, we should not leave out the women because they're the ones who are buying children that are abducted, and they're the ones who are also sometimes pressuring their spouses or members of their communities to bring them children. So I think that came out like really clearly during this discussion, and I think this is also an angle that we need to look at on how we can work with the women in as far as collection of abducted children is concerned.
Yeah, and a thing to add is perhaps that the emotion around the abductees and the abduction returns. There's a little bit of a narrative sometimes in Juba and in some of the more legalistic conversations that because this is happening in the context of a kind of peace process and negotiation, that these are political moves that are being made around the abductions. But you only need to see the reactions of the community when the abductees are returned and the emotive atmosphere of these moments to understand that it has a real depth to the communities in terms and explains why this is seen as one of the most hopeful aspects of the process overall. But obviously it has its political dimensions too, because they don't want it to be perceived as imbalanced. So we have the abductee returns, some of which happened in the meeting itself, which was interesting as well, because that came out of a meeting online, in fact, of the commissioners a few weeks beforehand, where all the commissioners said, look, we need to have a gesture of our commitment, and can we all try and identify and return at least one? And they didn't all succeed, but some did. So how then to build on that as well with the commissioners and their sense of accountability. In terms of the meeting as a whole, what else do you see as the positives around where we're at, the meeting itself, and what lies ahead?
I think from the GPA side, I think the chief administrator coming at the last day of the meeting, and it's also not only from the GPA side, but all the communities, because the new chief administrator is someone that had worked with these 3 communities for a very long time. He knows the members of the ICGS, the different structures, and he is very well conversant with the context and the conflict. So when he came to the meeting, people were so happy. And people were very positive to receive him. I remember one of the women saying, you're not a child of Murle, but you are our child. For Dinka and Nuer in Murle, you are our child. And I remember Madir singing for him. And someone told me like that is one of the highest form of honor to sing for someone. So I think his coming has also brought some level of renewed hope to the communities, seeing someone that they think understand their context. So I think that was so exciting.
I think the specific agreement on the return of the abductees is incredible. And it could end either way. By the next ICGS, if any county or the numbers hasn't been agreed and there is no proper explanation, that could bring everything unstuck somehow. But what it gives people is they have a target to work towards. And I think no one wants to come back without at least showing that they're committed to the process. For me, that's was very positive, walking away that there is some sort of a basis on how. And then there's some discussion around the roads. Usually they were talking of these feeder roads that sort of will encourage the communities to link with each other and the youth to visit each other and conduct some exchange visit. I think this time the drawing and the mapping and the agreeing to some 3 main roads was quite promising in a sense that this could lead into something in a way. And for me, for the youth leader of the Bor South, Manyok, to say, look, let's try to work together, and I would like to come from Bor South to come to Manyabol and told the leader, Marin, to also say, let's meet and talk. And this is them talking to each other in a sense. I think that provides really positives. It's now upon the partners to support some of the logistics to make these things work. I think that was quite incredible. I was watching Thorbolis in particular. There was a moment where a song was played and everyone went around singing and dancing. And I could see he joined the dancing and singing, and I thought, so maybe what he said the other day, maybe there's sort of a change of heart in a sense, but that's sort of a very good atmosphere the way the process has ended.
Yeah, and on the road openings, you see also when the youth particularly get into that conversation, although also the Duk Commissioner in this instance, the energy of looking at in the dirt, the directions people plan to come from and how that could work, and the real strengths of that logistical and spatial mindset of the youth that is something they draw on for sometimes violent purposes, but it has this potential to be a skill for opening up avenues of exchange.
What was also interesting is the conversation around the joint communal school. And of course, this is a topic that the communities have not concluded on where they want it to be. But I believe it came out from the Pieri Peace Agreement, right? The idea that maybe a joint boarding school for students from these three communities to study together would be one of the contributors for peace. So that was discussed in this particular ICGS meeting. Of course, they have different ideas on where they want the school to be, but I think towards the end, they were somehow coming to a closer, they're not having the gap as far as where they want the schools to be. And I think this is a conversation that will continue, but it was a good one.
Yeah, and even if it's not concluded, there's that will that this is a good idea and this is something that could be symbolic for the process. And then we have also the example of the youth leader who got up from the Murle side and said, well, I wasn't even really aware that there was a peace, but now I can see this, then I'm willing to take a different approach from here on in. And in and of itself, okay, perhaps not the biggest deal, but it does show that when people come together and when people see even the possibility of an alternative, there is this willingness to explore a different approach.
Was it the last youth who said he was a thief?
Yeah. Got up and started by saying, I'm one of the thieves.
I was one of the thieves, but from today, interesting,
Yeah. So any narrative that everyone's just hell-bent on pursuing violence as a means of realizing their objectives is kind of rebutted pretty strongly by these examples of people who see a different way. So let's move on now to discuss a little bit the diaspora, because in some of the conversations with the diaspora, what comes across as well is this fatigue and frustration as well. We've talked about the frustration of the communities here, but that extends also to the diaspora. So David, you're closely linked particularly with the Australian diaspora. Can you say a little bit more about how this plays out in that context?
I think the diaspora will potentially play a key role moving forward. Initially, the conversation or the engagement between the diaspora and their communities were along the line of, it was negative in a sense, because once the raid takes place, people get killed, then the diaspora are called to say, look, you have to take care of the relatives of the disease, you have to send money and do so. For the diaspora, they haven't really hooked into the possibility that there would be a different path. Rather than supporting violence by resourcing it, they haven't been revealed or shown that there is a possibility to actually invest in the peace process. And that is a conversation we have started recently to say, look, as much as you could hear there are attacks, all these things that are happening, there's also some good work in terms of peace investment that are happening. And can you come at the back of that? And so our engagement has been really very vigorous in a sense with the greater Jonglei community, who are the majority really, and in particular just Australia, who play a key role. So that has a potential where it will lead. And the last meeting we had in Melbourne, Australia, the two key leaders that we met with were basically saying, look, from our side, we really don't want to invest in violence. We wanted to invest in something positive, something that could support the communities. And if there is a way you can tell us how we do that, we'll be happy to support that. So that is really a huge turnaround for us. And then, so now it's upon us to sort of keep that line of communication with the diaspora and see where this will lead us.
And the communities here are inviting that engagement too now as well. They're recognising that at times there's a need for support of all kinds, but when there are these opportunities to invest in peace, the community here also invites that investment from the diaspora too. So again, it's that same phenomenon of when there's an alternative that presents itself, people are actually willing to engage with it. So what's coming out as some of the things that the diaspora and others might be willing to invest in, or might that the community might see as most strategic, or what have you, for the positive pathways forward?
I think the last discussion around the schools, I think this is an easy thing that the diaspora could see to invest in. And if this idea of a boarding school in a place where the three communities agree to, and bringing the children of the three communities together, I think that will be phenomenal. That will be an amazing outcome of the whole long process to take place. And it's easy sell for the diaspora, because some of the conversation we've had with the diaspora, there is a need. They talked of education, you know, as a paramount thing, especially on the Murle side, that the Murle side have remained behind. So they wanted to ensure that there is sort of a provision of education to all children, and that will cut some of the negative cultural aspects that Murle practices in terms of their asset system. So the diaspora sees that, and so once we package this well and present it to them, I think it will be an easy one that for the diaspora to sort of jump on board. And lastly, they've begun to see that now, if there is no point of resourcing violence, if they can see now that there is an opportunity to divert some of the resources to something positive, I think next time they receive a call and say, could you support us financially to launch an attack, I'm sure they will hesitate a little bit and will ask more questions in terms of justification.
And education is also a bit of a comparative advantage for a group like the diaspora, because it's a long-term process, whereas there's so much short-term thinking in the aid sector, whatever rhetoric there might be as well. Yeah.
I just want to say, in addition to education, there has been a lot of alternative livelihood activities for the youth that has come up over and over in some of this meeting. So I also see this as an area where the diaspora could possibly tap in. Also, especially with conversation around like moving the communities in the border centers. For example, the communities talk about a market in Manubol and Anyidi. And so I think these are also areas that the diaspora could engage on to try to bring the communities closer to each other by creating activities that provide alternative livelihood to them, especially the youth, who are now raiding us as a source of livelihood to some extent.
And we now have the airstrip in Bish, which is in a strategic location for these intercommunal activities as well, that could be resourced in really interesting ways that could become economic pathways too.
I think that when we look at all this process, obviously all the time the issue of justice and accountability become a key part or a key questions. And the communities, and I remember in particular the paramount chief of Twitch East say that if the government is serious, I think they can stop this intercommunal violence immediately. And what he was alluding to is the idea that the government should really be strong on enforcing law. And that's where the weakness in all the processes that we are undertaking now. And he went further and said that, who said the government can't do this? The government can do that, because we have seen an example, for example, very strong leadership from Rin Twain, the governor of Lagos State, who came in, and you see the Lagos State now. So they say no one should tell us that this cannot happen. And so it's a challenge and a call out to Peter Guzulu and Majub, the both governors, to sort of really work together and really enforce law. And if they do that at the back of what the partners and the community are doing, then I think we have hope that peace can be achieved.
Just Related to that, I believe like for these communities to be able to progress and be stable, this conversation cannot also happen without the national government. There are things, for example, that comes in the discussion that the state or the local government may need support from the national government. Issues of communication, issues of roads, connection between the counties and the different villages. These, I think, are issues that requires, issues of security as well, that requires the intervention of the national government to support the local government in some of this intervention. And also something that stuck on my mind with regards to government intervention, the commissioners were saying, especially in GPAA, that there is no official communication from the government directing the commissioners to go and collect the children. So what was interesting, I think in Peter's speech when he came, he said he was going to issue a circular asking the commissioners to go out and collect children, which is positive. So for example, the Commissioner of Gumruk says most of the children that he's able to collect are children that have come voluntarily to the commissioner's office, but there's no specific effort by the commissioners or government administrators to go out to the communities and gather.
And it's a good example of government not being able to solve the problem in and of themselves, but using the levers that are available to them to help support the process at the community level. So we've, off the back of that, we've moved now into the next phase of trying to implement or support the implementation of what's been agreed at the ICGS. We hopefully have the next ICGS before the end of the dry season, if there's enough confidence that remains with the process. And this has also been one of the challenges, that people trying to encourage the communities to see this as a forum for addressing issues rather than when there are issues stepping back from that level of engagement. So we'll see how it all unfolds, but we can leave it there for today. And we can move to our lunch, which is getting cold. And if people want more information on some of the background to the ICGS and this whole process, there's all sorts of material on POFcast.org and peacecanal.org.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.